It's great to welcome to the program today Sasha Abramsky, freelance journalist and The Nation magazine's Western States correspondent. He's author of 10 books, including the recently published Chaos Comes Calling: The Battle Against the Far-Right Takeover of Small-Town America. Sasha, it's so good to have you on, and I have so many things I would like to talk with you about. Maybe to start, we've been following the growing involvement of Elon Musk in the forthcoming administration of Donald Trump. He's hanging out at Mar-a-Lago. He's in Paris with Trump. He's already at least potentially convinced Trump about some of the goodies that he would like for the benefit of his companies. What do you make of the origin story of how Musk initially got involved? Is it as simple as you dump 250 million into PACs and now you're Trump's friend, or is there sort of something more to it?
I think there's something more to it. I think if you look at Musk's story over the last 5 to 10 years, it's a process of radicalization. And you see this among people, across the economic spectrum. And you see that it was accelerated by the pandemic, that the pandemic happens, and a lot of people who were sort of mildly conservative before got radicalized by shutdowns, by vaccine mandates, and so on. And Musk happens to be the richest person on earth, so we sort of assume his motives are different from everyone else. But I actually think if you look at Musk's trajectory, you see a very ordinary trajectory, which is you see a person who is not necessarily the politically savviest or most politically literate of individuals, who thinks he knows a lot more than he knows, and because he has hundreds of billions of dollars behind him, has the power to muscle center stage. And so when Trump sort of befriends Musk and Musk befriends Trump over the last 3 years, it becomes this instant bro fest. Both of them are very rich. Both of them have these enormous egos. Both of them believe that they know way more than they know, and that, in Trump's infamous phrase, they're the only person who can fix the woes of the world. And so they form this sort of partnership that benefits both of them. It benefits Trump politically because he accesses all of Musk's not just money, but also his social capital. And it benefits Musk because he now finds himself on the inside of an administration that is going to dramatically rewrite regulations, dramatically reshape the federal government's system of investments, all of which can now be used to benefit Elon Musk. And I think what we're seeing here, and Bernie Sanders has been tweeting a lot about this, we're seeing the emergence of an absolute unfettered American oligarchy, something we've never seen, even in the sort of wealthiest days of the Gilded Age of the 1880s, 90s, or the 1920s before the Great Depression. We have never seen the kind of oligarchy that Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and the other sort of center billionaires now represent. It's something extraordinary.
I've even called it a kleptocratic, kakistocratic oligarchy, which arguably is even worse and more complex. In the context of Project 2025, do you see Musk's desires as serving the goals of Project 2025, either implicitly or explicitly, or are these sort of different paths and trajectories?
As far as I can see, they're an uneasy partnership. And that goes way beyond Elon Musk. There are these different constituencies that Trump is bringing together that sit well at the moment because they're all about power. But when they actually have that power and then they try and implement their agendas, they're going in completely different directions. So you have the MAGA base, which is this sort of, angry, nationalist, xenophobic, racist base. You've got the Elon Musk crowd, which is essentially these sort of techno utopians who believe that you can blow up existing infrastructure and then replace it with this sort of high technology utopia. You've got the Steve Bannon group, this sort of group that thinks very carefully about history and has really mapped out the way to a far-right revolution.
Hmm.
And then you've got these sort of vaguely traditionalist groups, Marco Rubio might be the example here, who are entering the cabinet with this assumption, maybe like the conservative assumption during Nazi Germany, that traditional conservatives can rein the great leader in. Didn't work well in the 1930s in the Third Reich. I doubt very much it's going to work well in Trump's authoritarian America. But I do think that it goes beyond just a sort of Musk vision versus another vision. I think there are all kinds of competing visions. And here's the thing. When you are dealing with a strongman who only deals with people who flatter and favor him, you're going to have an awful lot of sycophants coming into that administration. And those sycophants aren't going to say what needs to be said. They're going to say what they think Trump wants them to say, which means you're going to have this brewing chaos and these brewing feuds, but they're going to exist below the surface, and they're all going to be circling around the sort of radiant figure of Donald Trump. It doesn't make for democratic politics. It makes for the sort of court, almost like a regal royal court that you saw in medieval Europe. It's something that the modern democratic world is really very unfamiliar with.
You talk about, how Trump is impressed by a relatively narrow set of things. With women, he prefers women that he finds attractive. We know that. He gives significant preference there. He likes people who are wealthy. He sees wealth as a combination of, sort of virtue and proof of concept in some sense. When it comes to foreign policy, he seems quite smitten with more authoritarian strongman type leaders. I've spoken to a bunch of people kind of in my space who are convinced that within a year, the Musk bromance completely implodes because of the clash of egos, and that ultimately there's going to be some kind of disagreement, and the loyalty that Trump expects just won't be there anymore. What do you think? Do you think it's bound to implode?
I think it's likely to implode. You're absolutely right. Trump surrounds himself with baubles. He likes gold and glitter. He likes extreme wealth. He views wealth not just as a proxy, he views it as the be all and end all. If you are wealthy, you are valuable. If you're not wealthy, you mean nothing. All of his policies over his first term, and all the indications are that his policies over the second term, hew to this. They're policies designed to benefit the super elite, and they're policies that really don't help or in any way benefit everybody else. It's a mystery to me, and it's going to be a mystery to me till the day I die. It's a mystery to me how a man of his lack of morality and lack of empathy can claim the populist mantle. Because actually, he is the most plutocratic president in American history. His current cabinet and inner circle of advisors, which includes Elon Musk, obviously, is worth nearly $500 billion. He's appointing one billionaire after another billionaire after another billionaire to the offices that ordinary Americans need to maintain their access to Medicare, to maintain their access to Social Security, to maintain a clean environment, to maintain a workplace that's safe to work in. All of those areas are now being controlled by the super wealthy who have their own agendas. And you're absolutely right. Musk's ego is at least as big as Trump's ego. And when you have clashes of egos like that, very rarely does it last long in peace, because they do have their own agendas and they have their own sense of what's right and what's wrong. Neither of them likes compromise, and neither of them brooks fools or people they view as being fools. So I think it's more than likely that at some point some kind of Twitter or Truth Social blast goes out from one or another of them, and that sort of detente goes. Maybe it's because Trump doesn't approve a deregulation that Elon Musk wants. Maybe it's because Elon Musk, wants to burn even more down than Trump wants to burn down. But whatever's going to happen, at some point, that camaraderie shatters. And I do firmly believe that.
So we've kind of outlined many of the reasons why none of this is lining up to be good for sort of the average American, and in particular, small town America, as you write about in your book. You explain in the book that there is this seemingly unlikely coalition of Trump supporters that has come from many of these small towns. Now, when I try to look at it objectively, I see the first term policy was not good for farmers. It was not good in a lot of ways for small town factory workers in places like Ohio and Indiana, et cetera. So it seems, as is often the case, illogical that there would be this growing base of support in rural small town America. And yet we saw it, and we saw a shift in that direction from 2020 into the 2024 election. What explains it? Is it a cognitive dissonance? Is it a misunderstanding of what Trump is offering? Is it more personality driven? How do you square it?
I think it's a great question. Look, I've spent the last 30 years traveling around America, going to especially small towns and rural communities and writing articles. I've probably written 1,000 articles for dozens of different publications over the years. And when I go into those towns and those villages and those rural hamlets, I talk to people. I don't just sort of go in and sort of pontificate. I spend weeks and weeks talking to people. And so for my book, I was in two places. I was in a very small area in the Olympic Peninsula in Washington called Clallam County, and I was particularly focused on a little town called Sequim. And then I was in this right-wing county in far north of California called Shasta County, which has been right-wing for decades, and has now become even more right wing. And I talked to a lot of people. There was this incredibly charismatic barber called Woody Clendenin. There was an ex-Marine called Carla Zapata. There was a geriatric nurse called Jodie Wilkie. There were loads of people who had their own reasons for sort of going towards the right. And some of it was to do with a sort of maybe classically conservative narrative around guns, around regulations, around lack of sympathy for higher minimum wages and social welfare and things like that. But a lot of it was to do with the new right. Some of it was to do with sort of the rise of MAGA movement and the suspicion of mainstream media. And I think that's really important, that people just stopped getting their news from trustworthy sources and increasingly went to rumor mills around social media. And it broke down the concept of trust. I think part of it was the unique demagogic skills of Donald Trump. And I've never been one to sort of dismiss this guy and say, oh, he's just a buffoon, he's a clown. I've been reporting on Trump and on his language for 9 years, since 2015. I have immense respect for his skills as a demagogue. Doesn't mean I like those skills,
Yes.
but he is an extraordinarily skillful demagogue. He knows how to find people's resentments. He knows how to exploit those resentments and those fears. He knows how to bring people together into a movement built around resentment of other people and other groups and other ways of thinking. So I think that was part of it. I think the other part, which is just so enormous and yet doesn't get discussed enough, certainly not analyzed enough, is the role of COVID and the pandemic. That, here you have this once in a century total dislocation because of a public health emergency. And it wasn't just, one area or one state or one region. It wasn't just one country. It was the entire world skidded to a halt in 2020 and went into lockdown. And the consequences were immense. The psychological dislocation, the sense of distrust of government, because a lot of people just didn't understand the epidemiology, didn't understand the idea that you could have exponential growth, that you could have very low infection rates 1 week, but if you did nothing, you would have extraordinarily high infection rates maybe a month or two later. And so you had these lockdowns that were kicking in the spring of 2020. And in rural areas like Shasta County, there were almost no infections at the time. So you had locals who were extraordinarily antipathetic to the idea of a lockdown. Right. They thought it was, inimical to local liberty. They didn't understand why churches had to be closed, why schools had to be closed, why non-essential businesses had to be closed. And it fuels this resentment. And you start seeing people turning up at Board of Supervisors meetings, some of them with guns, some of them in costume, all of them angry and all of them shouting. And you have this sort of degeneration of civic discourse where in-person meetings or Zoom meetings, when these meetings went onto Zoom, just became this sort of exercise in incivility. And then you had the internet, which gives people this sort of imprimatur, this right to be aggressive, because it's anonymous. You can go online, you don't have to use your real name. You're angry at your public health officer because your public health officer has recommended social distancing or suggested people wear masks or whatever it might be. You look up the name of your public health officer, and then you send her a death threat, or you send her this sort of awful screed of the most misogynistic terms you can conjure up. And that's what was happening in 2020. And so you had this sort of utter breakdown of civility and the injection of a language of violence right into the heart of the body politic, not just at the national level, but in these small places like Shasta County or Sequim in Washington. And I found it fascinating. I was there, I was interviewing people, I was looking at these social media postings as they came online, and I was seeing this decline of civility. And I think we're sort of in the long tail, the aftermath of all of that. The COVID emergency is over. We get on with our lives now. But the psychological ramifications of that period of dislocation is with us. And it's playing out in our politics. And it's pushing politics in this weird sort of anti-authoritarian language right, which actually is very authoritarian. So they use the language of personal liberty. They use the language of freedom from government intervention. They demonize public health workers like Anthony Fauci, for example. But in actual fact, it's a really authoritarian project, because when those people get power, we're seeing the consequences, not just locally, we're now seeing it nationally. Trump's attack on the free press, the rise of this sort of very oligarchic, kleptocratic elite. The idea that nonprofits can be defunded or even gone after as being terrorist organizations if they say things or do things that Donald Trump disapproves of. Congress, the House committee yesterday recommended that Liz Cheney be prosecuted for daring to investigate Donald Trump's role in the January 6th uprising.
Yes.
Well, this is Orwellian. If we're in a situation where somebody can basically trigger an insurrection against the US government, not be convicted because he runs out the clock, comes back into power, and then launches prosecutorial efforts against the investigators.
Yes.
Well, that's the world of Hitler. That's the world of Stalin. That's the world of Putin. That is the world of authoritarianism. It's a really dangerous path that we're heading down. I hope we can find a way to sort of pull back from this before it's too late.
I hope so too. We've been speaking with Sasha Abramsky, freelance journalist, the Nation magazine's Western States correspondent, and also the author of numerous books, including Chaos Comes Calling, The Battle Against the Far Right Takeover of Small Town America. Sasha, really great having you on. I appreciate your time and insights today.
Oh, it was a joy. Thanks for having me.